Hello, everyone. Welcome back. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Davood Gozli, and today I'm very happy to be talking about a book that I really, really enjoyed reading. I was thinking about, as we are getting close to the end of the year, thinking about whether or not to make another video talking about a list of, top 10 books that I enjoyed reading during 2024. And if I make such a list and if I make such a video, this book will definitely be on that list. I didn't just enjoy it, I appreciated it, on different levels. I liked it as, very timely, very relevant, very well done. It's a very well done piece of public engagement and scholarship. It's called AI Snake Oil: What Artificial Intelligence Can Do, What It Can't, and How to Tell the Difference. Written by Arvind Narayanan and Sayash Kapoor. Arvind Narayanan is professor of computer science at Princeton, and he is the director of, let me check, he's the director of Center for Information Technology Policy. I'm looking at his Princeton homepage, and he has that photo of himself in one of his, I think, public engagements, reaching to the audience intellectually and making profound points. I'm joking. The second author, Sayash Kapoor, is currently a PhD candidate at Princeton University's Center for Information Technology Policy. So the two authors work together, and I have a lot of respect for the authors and what they have done here. If you have any interest in thinking clearly, carefully, critically about artificial intelligence technology and taking into consideration all the other relevant factors, historical, sociological, psychological, economic, into taking all those other things into consideration as you're thinking carefully about AI and AI technology, if you're interested in that, I would strongly and wholeheartedly recommend this book. It covers a lot of ground, and of course, some of what they have written here about, you can find elsewhere, and I'll talk about some of those other related books later in the video. But the way they bring these topics together, the treatment of these different topics, is very effective, very coherent, and meaningfully hangs together. To me personally, this book is also about another important question, which, as I said, it's personally important, and that is the question of what it means to critique. Critique is not, as many people say, as many people believe incorrectly, it is not about being negative, being a naysayer. It's not even just about debunking incorrect claims. It can be about those things, but those things on their own, they can be very tiring, and they have an emotional impact that maybe we can't bear for too long. Being a critic and criticism, the task of criticism, is essentially about becoming more aware, distinguishing between false promises and true promises, distinguishing between verifiable claims and non-verifiable claims. And even in the case of verifiable claims, distinguishing between possible ways that something could be verified. Not all claims can be verified in the same way. There are some claims that require more resources and more time for their verification. Or distinguishing between actual problems and imaginary problems, problems that can lead to action, meaningful engagement, and problems that just demand our attention because they are like spectacles, as Giroux said. Spectacles get our attention. They inspire awe. They are awe-inspiring, but they induce passivity in us. They make us passive. And I'll get to one of those types of problems that are, you can say, they fall into the category of imaginary. Okay, let's turn to table of content quickly. The table of content, I'm just going to talk at the higher level about the 8 chapters or 8 parts of the book. The first one is introduction. The second is how predictive AI goes wrong, some of the technical problems, the details of what prediction means and what it doesn't mean. The third chapter is why can't AI predict the future? In principle, there are problems with making certain types of predictions. The fourth chapter is the long road to generative AI. So generative AI, predictive AI, those are two different things. two classes of AI technologies. Although maybe we can consider both of them as generative AI, but predictive AI generates something that then we as humans treat differently. We treat generation of predictions because they're about the future as something qualitatively different. But anyways, let's accept and assume that distinction between generative AI and predictive AI. That's an important distinction in the book. So talking about generative AI, the authors point out that the history behind these technologies, even though they seem recent in our view, but they have a long history going back to mid 20th century. So the history, the long road. Chapter 5 is called, Is Advanced AI an Existential Threat? Or should we be afraid of kind of Terminator scenarios? This topic, although it's very attractive, very interesting to think about, it might be, the authors point out, it might be distracting us from more pressing, more immediate, and more tractable issues that may not be as sexy as image of a Terminator or a general artificial intelligence that surpasses us and then turns against us. But that's a kind of a spectacle problem that might absorb, might demand a lot of attention, and that attention won't be unavailable for more immediate, more relevant problems that we can actually do something about. Chapter 6 is called Why Can't AI Fix Social Media? This chapter is about content moderation, a third kind, so generative AI, predictive AI, and then content moderation. These are three different types of technologies or types of use for AI technologies. Chapter 7 is called Why Do Myths About AI Persist? So understanding how snake oil works in any domain, snake oil, is as much about understanding the salesperson who is selling snake oil, as much as it is about understanding the buyer's side. What is it about the buyer of snake oil that gives them the desire to want to believe in the remedial quality of snake oil as a panacea, as a solution, easy fix? And taking into account market pressures is something that the authors do, and organizational, institutional issues that make some institutions, quote unquote, broken, vulnerable, as well as human psychology, psychological tendencies in general. Let me read a couple of passages from the book. We read, the use of flawed AI is rampant in underfunded institutions. In journalism, the revenue earned by U.S. newspaper outlets through advertising and circulation has fallen from about $60 billion in 2000 to just over $21 billion in 2022. The haphazard adoption of AI by outlets like CNET, which published a slew of articles with factual errors, is partly a result of falling revenue in the entire industry and an attempt to reduce costs. We get, here's me talking, that's end of the quote. We touch on later in this video this theme of underfunded journalism and how it causes more problems in preventing sense of false hype. Let's go back and read another passage. Quote, the introduction of ChatGPT upended many educators' curricula. This made many teachers turn to AI designed to identify AI-generated text. The promise of such tools was that teachers could retain their previous instruction materials and rely on these detection tools to check whether students were using AI for writing their essays. Educational institutions, especially public schools and colleges, are often financially constrained, understaffed, and overburdened, making them seek solutions that promise efficiency and cost cutting. Teachers face immense pressure with growing class sizes and shrinking resources, making them susceptible to quick fix solutions. End quote. Another passage, quote, flawed AI also diverts focus from the core goals of institutions. For instance, many colleges want to provide mental health support for students. But instead of building the institutional capacity to support students through difficult times, dozens of colleges adopted a product called Social Sentinel to monitor students' social media feeds for signs of self harm. The accuracy was so low that even an employee of the company internally called it snake oil. But that didn't stop colleges from spending thousands of dollars on it. And instead of using the tool for preventing self harm, some schools and colleges use it for surveillance and monitoring student protests. End quote. These are actually from chapter 8, which is called Where Do We Go From Here? Something else that I like about this chapter, chapter 8, other than these relevant quotes, is how the discussion kind of comes to a conclusion with the help of two imagined case studies, two cases. One is under the subheading Growing Up with AI in Kai's World. The other one is titled Growing Up with AI in Maya's World. So these are two kids growing up in two different future futures. One is the worst case scenario in terms of the development and the use of AI technology, and the other one, Maya's World, is the best case scenario. And these two, worst case, best case, what they do is they give us a memorable summary of a lot of the points that the authors explore and discuss throughout the book. But that is a nice, effective way of summarizing a lot of them. Okay, now for the rest of this video, I'm going to continue to read, occasionally adding my comments. The next couple of passages that I'm going to read are, they have to do with the overview of the book and the task of the book, what the authors are aiming to accomplish. So let's read. Predictive AI, generative AI, and content moderation AI are the three main types of AI that we will discuss in this book. That's not an exhaustive list. As discussed earlier, there are many applications such as autocomplete or spell check that work well and fly under the radar. There are also applications such as robotics and self-driving cars that are worth discussing but didn't make the cut, in part because they don't yet have the societal consequences on the same scale as the applications we discuss. The next passage is about why critique and awareness and this type of attention that the authors are showing us here. Why is it important to introduce, not just in the public, but also in the AI, in more technical AI community? So we read, when the AI community becomes excited about a particular approach, a feedback loop is created in which researchers and funders influence each other to propel work in that area forward. Peer reviewers, who have a big hand in deciding what research is published, are often skeptical of research on approaches that have fallen out of fashion. As a result, the field often moves in sync toward the approach of the moment, almost entirely abandoning earlier research programs. This is what happened to neural network research in the 1970s, and in fact, symbolic systems are in such a position today. Elsewhere in the book, they are reflecting on a course that they taught on predictive AI, they developed and taught, and they asked, can we predict geopolitical events such as election outcomes, recessions, or social movements? Can we predict which video will go viral? And as they ask these questions, they write, what we found was a graveyard of ambitious attempts to predict the future. The same fundamental roadblocks seem to come up over and over. But since researchers in different disciplines rarely talk to each other, many scientific fields had independently rediscovered these limits. We were alarmed by the contrast between the weight of the evidence and the widespread perception that machine learning is a good tool for predicting the future. One notable example that they discuss is Google flu trends. They write, Google heavily promoted it as an example of AI and mass data collection used for social good. But within a few years, the accuracy of the predictions dropped precipitously. One reason was that it is hard to distinguish between media-driven panic searches on Google, and actual increases in flu activity. Another was that Google's own changes to its app changed people's search patterns in ways that weren't accounted for by the AI. Google flu trends ultimately ended up as a cautionary tale. The lesson is that even in cases where it is possible to make somewhat accurate forecasts, it is very easy to get the details wrong. Next, during the 2010s, predictive AI extended its tentacles into many spheres of life, judging us and determining our opportunities in life based on data covertly collected about us. We realized that while vendors of these tools aggressively chase clients, they are rarely transparent about how well their products work, or if they work at all. Notably, as far as we know, no hiring automation company has ever published a peer review paper validating its predictive AI, or even allowed an external researcher to evaluate it. End quote. They do qualify this statement. There have been some evaluations, but it was staged and guided, and the question was narrowly focused on the question of race and gender in a way that doesn't take into account other ways of like a random generation that is not systematically predictive of anything. Okay, now we're getting into as you might expect, the passages that I'm quoting are not following each other, and I'm jumping from place to place. Different book. This is my way of curating my notes and my key quotes, my key passages from the book. This is a couple of passages here now about verifiability. We read, quote, claims about AI differ in terms of how easy they are to verify and who can verify them. If a company claims that their speech recognition app transcribes 99% of words correctly, you don't have to take their word for it. You can try out for a few minutes and see if it transcribes your speech with acceptable accuracy. Jumping ahead. On the other hand, if your hospital employs AI, say for sepsis prediction, you have no way to judge its accuracy. In fact, no individual doctor can evaluate if it works. Each doctor works with only a small sample of patients, and a study with hundreds of patients would be needed to evaluate it. Things become even harder when predictions can't be tested for years to come, such as in Civil War predictions. And this is before we get into questions of access. Many AI systems are proprietary, so only the people who work at the companies building these systems have access to investigate them. All right, so the next passages are about the existential threats of artificial general intelligence. We read, the position among many in the AI community is that AGI is an imminent existential threat requiring dramatic global action. We are not saying that AGI will never be built, or that there is nothing to worry about if it is built. But we think AGI is a long-term prospect, and that society already has the tools to address its risks calmly. We shouldn't let the bugbear of existential risk distract us from the more immediate harms of AI snake oil. We can also replace bugbear with spectacle. We read later, we think the biggest risk to humanity will arise from people misusing AI, not from AI going rogue. This is incidentally a point that Yuval Noah Harari also makes in his recent book Nexus. He also says that the biggest risk comes from humans using AI technology, not the technology itself. Another quote, existential worries about AI overstate its capabilities and underemphasize its limitations, playing into the hands of companies who would prefer less scrutiny. When people adopt this frame of mind, they are much less likely to spot and challenge AI snake oil. End quote. Now we get to a very important point about AI journalism and hype, hyperbole, overstating, and how journalists are not often well positioned to be able to resist the hype that is coming from the companies themselves. We read, quote, there are many underlying reasons for hype in AI journalism. The leading one is the financial strain that the media is under. The rise of social media and click-driven journalism has led to a dramatic decrease in the ability to do in-depth reporting profitably. Besides, AI is a new beat in the sense that it's a trend. And journalists often do not have the expertise to call out companies' snake oil. Even if journalists question companies' claims, access to experts who can talk about the limitations of AI is limited. On the other hand, companies selling AI have plenty of money for PR campaigns. And if a journalist is too critical, companies may cut off their access to upcoming products and ability to interview sources at the company. For an overworked journalist who doesn't have the time to dive deep and wants to maintain good relationships with the companies, it can be tempting to lightly edit a press release and hit publish. Okay, now jumping to a passage about a side of AI, a side of development of AI and maybe revisions and updating of these technologies that I don't think are as well known. And to me personally, this was important because when I was desperate for a time, I worked for a company that did AI annotation. And I was a freelance data annotation worker, laborer. And I found it, the way the authors are describing that kind of work, extremely, very accurate. And I didn't know how widespread this problem is. Okay, let's read. This is part of a broader wave of the transition to globally distributed precarious work, where AI companies hire contracting firms in lower income countries. Precarious work refers to employment that is poorly paid, lacks employment benefits such as mental health counseling that may help overcome the trauma that many AI annotation workers face, and is insecure, which means that it may disappear at any time. As a New York Magazine investigation revealed, quote within a quote, it's steady enough, the work is steady enough to be a full-time job for long stretches, but too unpredictable to rely on. Annotators spend hours reading instructions and completing unpaid trainings, only to do a dozen tasks and then have the project end. This is true. I can verify this from my own personal, first-hand experience. The work is so immiserating that many data annotation firms have taken to recruiting prisoners, people in refugee camps, and people in collapsing economies. In other words, those who will accept this work because they have no choice. Next passages are about the topic of social phenomena and how they are different from, say, mechanistic phenomena, and why that makes prediction differently relevant for them in their cases. Why predicting social phenomena means something different than predicting a mechanical phenomenon. Quote, predicting the future is a focus in many scientific fields, but not in social science. Instead of predictions, the dominant approach in social science is to focus on improving our understanding of what causes phenomena of interest. For example, sociologists generally do not aim to predict individuals' future income for targeted interventions. Rather, they aim to understand the causes of poverty so that interventions can be targeted toward alleviating poverty. Similarly, while social science helps us understand the causes of incompatibility and divorce in marriages, it isn't used to predict whether a couple will file for divorce. As somebody who has a background in psychology, psychological research, psychological sciences, I agree with this assessment that social science is about understanding. This is actually a distinction made long ago by, among other people, Wilhelm Dilthey. Wilhelm Dilthey talked about the human sciences and said that they should be interested in understanding, not explaining and not predicting. The natural sciences, he argued, Dilthey, should be more concerned with explaining and predicting. Why do we focus on understanding? Because we are interested in bringing about state of affairs that are good for people, because we are in part motivated by empathy and concern for fellow human beings' well-being. Unfortunately, this sentiment is sometimes absent in psychological and social sciences too. So Narayanan and Kapoor are saying something here that is correct, but is not understood sometimes by people doing psychological and social research, unfortunately. The last passage I read is about content moderation and how we should focus on human decisions, not only technologies. So we read, while content moderation has often failed badly and even enabled large scale real world violence, we argue that these failures are not fundamentally about the technology, but rather intrinsic consequences of handing over the digital public square to unaccountable private entities. Okay. So there's a lot more going on in the book, a lot more. And those were just some of the passages that stood out to me, and I wanted to read them with you as a way of giving you a flavor of what this book is about, what it does. Now, some related books. Almost needless to say, I talked with one of my friends yesterday, and I was talking to him about this book, and he said, "Yeah, Black Swan," and I agree. It's almost needless to say, on the topic of prediction, Nassim Nicholas Taleb and the book Black Swan and the follow-up books Anti-Fragile, Skin in the Game. If you want a critical examination of quantitative methods of prediction, the Black Swan is a really important book. On the topic of another topic touched on and explored in AI Snake Oil is how technology amplifies human or social bias and injustice. The existing injustices or our tendencies to have injustices in our decisions are amplified because technology just makes our decisions and acts more powerful. There are 3 books that I have discussed on the channel already. The Tyranny of Metrics, and that is my favorite among the 3. Tyranny of Metrics, Weapons of Math Destruction, and More Than a Glitch. All 3 are great books. If you have to take one, I would say Tyranny of Metrics. My opinion. On the topic of content moderation and virality on social media and the social consequences of that, social and psychological consequences, especially on people who are growing up and developing, there's a book called The Outrage Machine by Tobias Rose-Stockwell. Good book. The Rose-Stockwell book, although it is quite good, and it has a lot of colorful metaphors. I love the metaphors and analogies in that book. But the book is a little bit disorganized. If you don't mind that, then The Outrage Machine is worth reading. And The Anxious Generation, which I recently discussed on the channel. On the topic of human bias, more psychological, The Knowledge Illusion, which the authors of this book, AI Snake Oil, refer to, the illusion of explanatory depth. Thinking Fast and Slow are relevant. And then there's a book called Noise by Kahneman, Sibony, and Sunstein, which I have discussed on my YouTube channel. But I had a criticism of that book because, in my understanding, Kahneman and colleagues refer to noise as a problem sometimes when it is not really a genuine problem. And Narayanan and Kapoor, they express a sentiment that is more aligned with what I also agree with. I find that more reasonable. What they say is that they want us to acknowledge that sometimes in some domains, some fields, randomness should be embraced as an inherent feature of some phenomenon. And sometimes it is much more preferable to systematic decisions that are biased. And this systematic decision involves a lot of investment on our part. And it's better to be random. This sentiment is also expressed by Jan Elster in Reason and Rationality, which is also an amazing book. So if you're careful, you can read this AI Snake Oil as in part a criticism of Kahneman, Sibony, and Sunstein's book, Noise. Okay, I'll stop there because one of my cats just jumped on the desk and he's gonna probably drop the camera. Drop my phone. Okay, last thing, my reading group. We are going to jump into new books starting in January. We are currently finishing up a discussion of this book, Capitalism and the Death Drive. In January, we are going to start discussing Sense and Sensibility, then Civilization and its Discontents, Sigmund Freud. If you're interested, check out our schedule and sign up if you're interested in joining our group. That's it. Take care, and I'll talk to you next time.